Today I'm going to be doing a transmission service on this 2020 Chevy Traverse. This procedure is the same thing for all 2018 through 2023 Chevy Traverses, GMC Acadias, and Buick Enclaves. They all use the 9-speed automatic transmission. Please check the description below for links to everything that you'll need to perform this service. Also, I've time-stamped everything so you can skip to any certain spot you want if you don't want to hear me jabber on and on about different things that you don't care about. This particular 2020 Traverse is in because it has the transmission shudder that is all too common on these. And this one has not ever been serviced. It is the original owner's. It has 142,000 miles on it, and the transmission has never had a service done. And despite the fact that it seems that you could blame the owner for this, the fact is, if you look at the manual says that under normal driving situations, there is no recommended service interval for this transmission. They consider it lifetime fluid. I don't agree with that, and I think this transmission is currently not agreeing with that, but that is in fact what the manual says, and I would by default tell you to follow the manual. In this case, I don't like that recommendation, and also in the manual it states that under severe driving conditions that you should change the transmission fluid every 45,000 miles, in which case this is way past that, 100,000 miles past that just about, and I would recommend probably following those severe conditions and the recommended 45,000 mile interval in those conditions if you want to give your transmission the best chance at a long life. I'm going to go down the list of tools and supplies that you'll need right away here. Again, check the description. I'll have linked everything. We've got 2 gallons of transmission fluid, which is slightly more than we'll need. 7 quarts is about what you'll need. Because this transmission is shuddering, I'm going to be using Instant Shudder Fix, a product by LubeGuard that I've had success in the past with this very issue on these transmissions. So we're not going to try and figure out whether or not we need it. We're just going to use it. LubeGuard makes excellent products. I'm generally not very in favor and do not promote additives. I believe that most things you need are contained in the fluid itself, whether it's oil, transmission fluid, coolant. I don't generally recommend additives, but I can vouch for LubeGuard as a whole, but specifically this product. That's why we're going to be using that. It'll be linked with everything else in the description below. Then there's very few tools you actually need. I have a tall drain because I'm going to be doing this on a lift. You might just be using a regular drain pan. This service can absolutely be done without a lift. Of course, it's easier with a lift, which is what I have and how I'll be doing it. To fill it, you need a funnel. I'll link this exact one. This is kind of my go-to funnel for a lot of these transmission services. It seems to work great for all of them. This shouldn't be an exception. So we've got our funnel there, and then kind of the only tool we need is an 11mm socket right here, and then we've got a regular ratchet as well as a torque wrench. I do have the torque specs, which will be included down below, to torque everything down to spec, and so we've got our torque wrench for that. The last tool that we need is a scanner that we can read transmission temperature on. So that is all that you need. So we'll get this thing lifted up in a moment and get into it, but there's 2 things I want to cover. And you can certainly skip these. There again, everything's time-stamped, but I'll try and head off some of the usual questions I get. The 2 questions that I would expect people will be curious about are A, fluid type, and we're really going to discuss fluid type versus brand. Which is which, what matters, what doesn't, what should you use, what am I using? We'll cover all that in a second here. The second thing that I get a lot of questions about are the level setting procedure. This is a very common procedure where you need to warm up the transmission to a specific temperature window, not an exact degree, but a range. In this case, 185 to 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And people don't want to buy the scanner. I understand that, although you probably should have one of these around if you're trying to work on modern cars. But I understand if you don't have one, you don't really want to spend the money. That is the most expensive part here, most expensive tool here. But I do not recommend servicing these transmissions without being able to read transmission temperature to do it correctly. The reason I don't, the alternative that people a lot of times suggest is, why don't you just measure how much fluid you take out and then put in that same amount of fluid? And at face value, that sounds like a great option. And I guarantee that you'll be getting close if you do that. However, there's a reason they recommend this procedure. And my main question is, how do you know that it's currently at the correct level? You're assuming it's at the correct level. And if it is, then refilling it with the same amount you drain will get you back to the correct level. But there's a couple ways this can go wrong. Number one, if it is not currently at the correct level, then you will have it back at the not correct level when you're done. The second way this can go wrong is that you somehow mismeasure. Maybe you spill some, who knows? Either way, you don't measure exactly right what you take out and what you put in, and therefore you wind up at a different level than it was at, if it was even at the right level. So those are kind of the two main ways that it can go wrong. And this is such an easy procedure to do when you have a tool that will read transmission temperature, that there's just no reason to try and come up with a different way to do it. So I do not recommend anything but reading the temperature and doing it as the manufacturer recommends. The question frequently comes up, or more commonly the statement, that you are going to destroy that transmission because you didn't use OEM fluid, in this case AC Delco. And I do not recommend that you don't use AC Delco fluid. AC Delco fluid is excellent fluid. In this case, it's Dexron 6 is what the recommended fluid is for this application. And so that's a great option, and I'll have that linked down in the description along with this Valvoline. This is what I stock because it is recommended for many, many applications. And it is also an excellent fluid that I've never had a problem with. I wouldn't run this in my own vehicles or anybody else's if I thought it was inferior fluid. I do not think so. I think it is excellent fluid, and that's why I run it. But so back to the point, I guess, here is brand versus type. You should never under any circumstance run a different type of transmission fluid. There again, in this case, it is Dexron 6. Only run a Dexron 6 or Dexron 6 equivalent fluid, one that's recommended for applications requiring Dexron 6. Don't use something different. But when it comes to brand, that's where my viewpoint is probably going to differ from some of you out there, and that's just fine. Use whatever you feel most comfortable with. But I don't think there's anything wrong in running a different brand. In this case, Valvoline. And on the back of this bottle, I'm not going to get it up close and try and zoom it in, but on the back it does say that it's recommended for applications calling out for Dexron 6. So that's what this is. That's what I'm using. So again, if you comment about that, I'm not going to argue with you that using AC Delco fluid is a great choice. It is a great choice. I also would not steer you away from Valvoline. And in this case, because I use a lot of Valvoline, have a lot of Valvoline on hand, that's exactly what's going in this. And my guess is that between the Valvoline and this shudder fix, we're going to resolve these transmission issues, and this customer is probably not going to have any issues for a long time with this transmission. So let's get into this. Let's get this thing up in the air, and we'll get rolling. Here we are under the vehicle. There's the front of the vehicle, rear, driver's side, and passenger side. Here is the 11mm drain plug. We'll get our ratchet on here. We'll loosen this up. Now, whether or not this fluid looks dirty, I know this is due for a service because of the shudder, but I am kind of curious at 142,000 miles. Let's see, and be careful if this is hot. Let's see here. Okay, that is not red. It's not super, super dirty, but definitely a good time to be doing it based on the shudder and the color. Now that we're down to a drip, we're going to reinstall the drain plug. By the book, it would not be a bad idea to put a little bit of thread sealant on this. Real world, I do not have issues with these things actually leaking, so generally I do not install unless for some reason I expect a leak. In this case, I don't. So I'm just going to reinstall it just as it came out. We'll get it started and tighten down most of the way by hand. Then we're going to grab the torque wrench, which is set to 106 inch-pounds. All right. Now we're moving up top to the engine bay, and we're gonna go right down in here. You can see right there is the fill cap. So it's a little tough to catch it on camera, but I can reach down there and unscrew it. Now I don't need to do this, but it's super, super easy to pick up a little bit of extra space. So we're gonna flip these tabs up, if I can do it one-handed, and we can just swing the ECM right out of the way, and that gets us just a little bit more space. Now if I reach down here, I can just unscrew that by hand. And then we can take our funnel and easily put it right down in the fill hole, and we're ready to pour in our fluid. The first thing I'm putting in is the instant shudder fix. I've already cut the top off of this and I'm already making a mess. We'll follow that up with a gallon of fluid. You can see how red this looks compared to the stuff that came out. We'll do about one more quart. We are up in the vehicle. We're going to start it up. And I've got my scanner plugged in. Now this scanner, we'll see, I don't know how this displays, there we go. This is a Zurich ZR15S. It is the same as the Innova 5610, which I will link both down below. Sometimes best pricing is, depending on who's got sales going on, might be Harbor Freight for the Zurich and might be Amazon for the Innova. But we're gonna get it linked up here. And while that's going on, actually, I'm gonna reach over, I'm gonna shift this into reverse. I'm not even gonna let the wheels spin up. I'm keeping my foot on the brake, but we'll go reverse for a couple seconds. And then we'll go drive for a couple seconds. We'll put it back in park. And then we're gonna go back to the scanner. So here's how the menu works. We are going to hit menu. And we're gonna scroll down to service check and hit enter. Chevrolet, Traverse, enter. It is the 3.6, enter. That's the vehicle, yes. And there's transmission fluid temperature. We're at 136, so we're gonna have to let this warm up a little bit until we hit 185. Now that we've got it up to temp, we've got the vehicle level. It's between 185 and 203. I definitely like to target the lower end of the range so that as it continues to warm up, we're still within it. Here's our drain plug, which we've already torqued down, and you can see I've put the socket up here on the level check plug. So I'm gonna scoot over here, try and get a little bit more light on it, and we'll get our ratchet in here. It's a little bit of a weird angle, but it works. So we can loosen this up. We'll get our drain pan underneath. Now I expect that nothing will come out because I have not put enough fluid in yet, and I'm correct in that assumption. Now I can move back up top and I can add fluid until it starts running out of that level check plug. This way you're not putting excess fluid in and then draining a bunch out. We're gonna try and hit it just about right where we stop as soon as the excess starts flowing out of the hole. Now that it's flowing out, we'll let the excess drain. Now that it's down to a trickle, which is a small stream or steady flow of drips, any time now is appropriate to plug it. And the same thing goes for the fill plug. You may want to put some thread sealant on it. In this case, I'm just gonna tighten it back down as it was. We'll wipe off all the droplets here. And then just like the drain plug, this gets torqued to 106 inch-pounds. I couldn't quite get the right angle, so here's a 1 foot extension with our 11mm socket. We'll feed this in here. And we've got it torqued to 106 inch-pounds. Now that we've got the level set and got the vehicle drop back down, I'm going to remove the funnel and put the cap back on. Put the ECM back in place. And close the hood. So now we're going to take it out for a drive and verify everything's good. I'm not going to shoot a video while out on a drive. I'll report back if there's any problems, and I will keep you updated in the comments down below. If you have questions about, did this solve the problem, or, how long did it solve the problem for? Is this vehicle still running good? Feel free to comment at any point, and I'm very responsive to comments, and I will answer your questions along those lines as time progresses and we find out how long and if this holds up and this truly does resolve the problem. But overall, I would rate this transmission service on this vehicle as being relatively easy. It really doesn't get a whole lot easier than this. Not much is needed for tools and supplies, and there's just a couple basic things you need to know to get it done right, which I've included in this video. So thanks for watching. Good luck with your own service, and we'll see you next time.